Hello everyone. So, topic that we have on our hands today is reproduction. We'll be mainly focusing on the major attributes of reproduction because this is the thing that I picked out for mostly for grade 10th. And while you're at it, it's very important that the things that you learn in grade 10th, it would be extended in grade 12th, right? And the things that you're studying in grade 9th or have studied, it would be extended in grade 11th. So whatever you if you are going to take up physics, take up chemistry, mathematics, biology, or any arts stream, doesn't matter, whatever your interest is, make sure that you cover things very well in these two grades, right? Because these would lay up your foundations, right? And we do not joke about it, right? Because if the foundation is weak, well, be rest assured, right, that the house won't stay up for much longer, right? So without wasting much time, we'll get into it. So if I ask, right, that what do you mean by reproduction, right? This is the thing that we are going to study. So if I ask what you mean by reproduction, some would say that it is a process which helps us to continue our species, right? Definitely it's a thing that helps us to continue with our species, right? Because naturally and biologically, every single organism, be it plants or animals, whatever they are, the only purpose is to continue their species, right? To produce more and more offspring. And as you move into the evolution and other things, there's a term called natural selection, right? So natural selection tells us that if there are n number of species, right, n number of species, depending on the attributes, right, of themselves, and when it crosses with the environment will allow a certain attributes of certain species, right, that would be suitable for this particular environment, right? And then they would continue, otherwise they won't. So reproduction was meant for the continuation of a species, right? And there are certain organisms which reproduce in huge quantity. There are certain organisms which reproduce, say, like 1 or 2 offspring at max. There are certain that bud, right? And then there are certain animals that would reproduce up to 11, up to 12 offsprings at a time. So it all goes back to natural selection. While that is not the topic for us today. So if we go by the book's definition, right, so we would say that reproduction is one of the basic, right, or you say fundamental attribute, right? It is a fundamental attribute of a living organism. Definitely non-living organisms, they cannot reproduce, right? So I think it's very obvious when I say that it is only for living organisms, now through which it is able to produce more of its kind. They have to produce more of its kind. And when I say more of its kind, I think somewhere it relates to species, right? For example, we as humans, when we produce another human, right? They look like us. They are not exactly 100% similar to us genetically if we talk about it, but the bodily structures, like they have got 2 arms, they've got 2 legs, they've got 10 digits in their both hands combined, and then they've got 10 digits in their feet, right? They've got 2 eyes, 2 ears, right? A pair of teeth, 32, not a pair, obviously. And then there are other bodily structures. So by similarity, I mean bodily structure, right? And it will relate somewhere. I think you can understand it now when I said that we need to continue our species. So when we produce more of our kind, it is definitely going to relate to our species itself, right? So new individuals are produced, right? Definitely there will be new individuals, right? And these new individuals will again reproduce. They will reproduce again, right? And thus they increase the population, right? There is an increase in population, and again it leads back to the continuation of our species. So that is what would I mean if we say that it's the nectar, right? If we say that it is the nectar of reproduction, it won't be wrong, right? Nectar of reproduction, because ultimately we are continuing our species, right? New individuals are birthed, they again reproduce, they increase the population, and the cycle goes on and on, right? Now the question is, how do we ascertain whether two organisms belong to the same species or not, right? Say there is an organism A and then there is organism B, right? So how do we know that they belong to same species or not, right? That is the question. So how would we know, right? So the example of let's talk about a jungle crow and the urban crow, right? Common urban crow that we see with the light gray body and black wings, and then there is another jungle crow that is altogether black, right? Totally black. Now you may think that they belong to the same species because they resemble each other, right? But they belong to two different species, right? Now how is it that they belong to two different species? Let's hop into it. The urban crow, right, and the jungle crow, both are what? Both are crows. So you might think that they belong to same species. No, they are not from the same species. They belong to different species, right? Now how? You may say that both are crows, right? But the thing is, they cannot interbreed, okay? Cannot interbreed. Species means, let's say there is an individual A, there is an individual B, right? So in order for them to be of same species, they need to cross or interbred or reproduce among themselves, right? So unless and until individuals are unable to reproduce among themselves, we must not say that they belong to the same species, right? So I think you can take it from here. Unless and until organism can interbreed, they do not belong to the same species, right? So if I ask you now, what do you understand by the term species? I think you can answer it, right? Look up for it, a better explanation if you want to. But in a nutshell, a species is defined as a group of organisms that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring, right? It goes back to here. Organisms that could interbreed, right? And there should be offspring, and the offspring should be fertile. By fertile we mean that the offspring produced should be able to produce more of its kind, right? Now organisms produce similar offsprings, right? So but they do not produce the exact copies of themselves, right? We talked about similarity, but I told you that we are not genetically similar, right? We are bodily similar, yes, right? We are not genetically similar, but we are bodily similar. The bodily attributes are same. Now the offspring have similar body structures and similar genetic blueprints in their cells, right? But when nucleus divides and separates the two copies of DNA, right? So that's where all the difference comes from. You will be shocked to know that humans are closer to mice. There is 99.99% genetic similarity between humans and mice, and this 0.1% difference is that distinguishes us from them, right? So that is one of the reason why most of the pharmaceutical companies, or even the labs, the studies that we do are based on mice themselves, right? I mean, even I have studied on them, right? So we were treating, we were trying to find a cure for cancer, not cure exactly, but there were certain studies, and we were trying to solidify them, and we were using mice for the study, right? Because they are genetically similar. So whatever changes the medicine could bring in the mice genome, it could bring it in human genomes too. But the trials are on altogether different levels. Now, there is variation from it. We have established, right? Variation. Now, reproduction involves DNA replication, right? You'll be studying about it in detail in later classes, right? And if the replication is exact, the body design and feature of organisms are maintained across generations, right? So if replication is exact, what things are preserved? The body design, right? And what else? The features of the organisms. Features of organisms. These two things are conserved through the generation, right? But reproduction provides variation. It definitely should. Take a look, right? In your family, the way your father looks, the way your mother looks, and now if you have a sister or a brother, or even if you look at yourself, even though you are their offspring, right? But if I make you and your father, right, stand side by side, would anyone be able to say that you and your father look 100% same? No, you do not, because your facial structures would differ, right? Your height would differ, your hair color would differ, your skin texture would differ. Whether your father has straight hair, you may have curly hair. All these things would be different, but the bodily features would be same. Your father is having two arms. It is a must that you have two arms too, unless and until there are certain anomalies, right? I'm not talking about accidents or anomalies. In this case, we are talking about the normal things, right? So unless and until there are certain anomalies or certain accidents or some other things, right, you and your father will have almost similar bodily, not almost, 100% similar bodily structures. And by 100% similar, I mean two eyes, two arms, right? 2 ears, all those things. But this 0.1% is what makes you and your father different from each other, right? It's possible that your father might have curly hair or straight hair, you might have a straight hair, right? It's possible that your father is tall, you may come out short, right? It's a possibility. So all those possibilities are dependent on this 0.1% change, and this 0.1% change is there in the DNA, right? DNA is something that codes for every single function in your body. So a certain mismatch in DNA sequences might bring out drastic variations, right? And this variation, it could bring advantages. It could bring advantages too, and it could bring disadvantages too. It depends, right? So when we move to evolution, and when we move to the natural selection, as we have talked about before, you will get to know how the variation will bring out advantages and disadvantages in certain organisms cases, right? Now all organisms are exposed to environmental conditions, right? Now the natural selection that we have talked about, it comes from adaptability to the environment, right? So they adapt to cope with even slight changes in the environment, right? And any drastic change in the environment, right, it would be it an extreme temperature change, varying water level, an earthquake or a meteorite, it may take a heavy toll on organism that are unable to cope with its effects. So this advantage and disadvantages, they root from the same thing. Okay, let's say that there is a bacteria, right? Let's say it's a bacteria and it is reproducing, and then it has, let's say, two offspring here, right? Offspring 1 and offspring 2. Now offspring 1 has certain proteins that may tolerate heat, right? And now it has certain proteins, the offspring 2, which do not tolerate heat, right? Now, in case of extreme temperature rise, right? Extreme temperature rise, which one of them you think will survive? Right? So this bacteria 1 will survive. Why? Because there are certain proteins that are making it resistible to heat, to high temperatures, right? Now, this is because there are variations. So now, one more thing. In bacteria, they make exact copies, genetically exact copies, 100%. Okay, so do not take it literally. I use this just to give you an example, right? If it has a certain sequence of AGCT, all of its offspring will have certain same sequences, right? It is just for example's sake. Do not take it literally. We will come up with certain other examples when we talk about Galapagos Island and the Darwin finches or the turtles, and there are many more examples, but we keep it for the evolution part. We will leave it here, right? It was just for an example how variation may bring out advantage and disadvantages. I hope that's clear, right? Now let's move on. Now, reproduction is stemmed in two portions, right? Reproduction may be sexual for us, organisms, animals, flowers, plants, right? All of them. And now there is another called asexual reproduction. There are two terms, right? Now, the major difference between asexual and sexual reproduction is of what? Can you think of something? It is of gametes, right? The major difference is of gamete, or we call them sex cells, right? Now, sex cells are of two types. One would be male, definitely, and another would be female, right? Because without male and female, there will be no reproduction. Sexual reproduction, I mean. So, sexual reproduction requires gamete. Asexual reproduction does not require any gamete. That's it. That is the baseline of it, right? Now, asexual reproduction we will discuss first. So, in asexual reproduction, it takes place commonly in lower organisms, right? And by lower organisms, there are lower plants, there are lower animals, where the body is not that complex, right? No complexity at all in their morphology. You have to keep that in mind. No complexity in morphology, right? There are different forms of asexual reproduction too. Now, some of you may know it too. There is one binary fission, right, as seen in, bacteria, yeast, right, euglena, amoeba, paramecium. These are all the examples that you must have heard. Now, there is multiple fission too, right? Now, there is budding too, right? So, these are all different types of asexual reproductions, right? Now, in certain plants, there is, or lower organisms, there is fragmentation, right? Then you have spore formation. Along with the spore formation, you have vegetative propagation. Must have heard these terms. Vegetative propagation is there, right? And when we move to, in vegetative propagation, you must have heard of something artificial vegetative propagation too, right? Artificial. It has, human interference in it, per se. So, moving on to the asexual reproduction, we will look into binary fission first, okay? Binary fission. Very simple, very easy. We are not going to go in much detail, because if I tell you everything here and now, you should have something to do in higher grades too, right? Because if you study everything here, then what's the purpose of different grades, right? Now, let's talk about binary fission. So, binary fission has a requirement, and the requirement is what? Favorable environmental condition. Favorable environmental condition, right? and it is the division of one cell into two similar cells. Okay, why two similar cells? Because the name itself suggests it. Binary means two. Okay, so this is the simplest method of asexual reproduction. Simplest one. Why simplest one? Because there is one cell and then it's dividing into two. What could be more simpler than this, right? So it is the simplest one of the asexual reproduction. I think that is clear, right? Now there are certain examples of it. Okay, now there is one cell, okay, and it is undergoing certain changes. There is nucleus, there is cell, right? The first thing is that there is certain tension in the cell, right? Nucleus starts to divide first, right? Then it will further elongate. Tension increases, it further elongates, right? And then it will change into two cells with their own nucleus. Now this is your parent cell, and these are called daughter cells. Okay, now these things, they occur in unicellular organisms, right? Unicellular organisms. Certain examples we may have. So bacteria is there, right? Bacteria is there. Yeast is there. Okay, you have euglena. Examples are important, right? Wherever you are, whichever exam you are going to write, make sure that you remember accurate and enough examples for them, because it makes all the difference. Like if I ask you what is asexual reproduction, or if I ask you what is binary fission, and then from the name itself, as the name suggests, you say that binary fission means there is one cell and then it divides into two daughter cells. That's it, right? But it says that it indicates that you must have learned it or mugged it up. But example is what that it distinguishes you from others, right? It tells you apart that yes, you have learned something, you have actually looked into things. So you must keep examples in your head all the time, right? So you have euglena, you have amoeba, and then for example you have paramecium, we can say. Paramecium. We have paramecium. Look for the spelling. I might make some mistakes. I may make some mistakes. Now in okay, let's talk about orientation. Say that this is a bacterial cell, right? And if I ask this cell to divide in a certain direction, is it feasible or possible or logical to do so? I don't think so, right? So it will say no, I will divide whichever way I want. Okay, it will divide into two daughter cells. But there is one such organism, and that organism is Leishmania. You must have heard the name Leishmania. It causes what? A disease. It causes a dreadful disease, and for disease we should pick out some bright color. Okay, it causes, oh no, not this one. So the disease it causes is Kala Azar. Okay, it causes Kala Azar, right? Now it has a certain orientation. Okay, by orientation I mean a certain direction. Why? Due to their specific body structure. So if question comes that which organism divides in a definite orientation, right, it would be Leishmania. So the binary fission here takes place in definite orientation, and the reason behind that is their specific body structure. Specific body structure. That's all you have to keep in mind for now. Okay. Now, if your school allows it, you must have seen a permanent slide of a bacteria or an amoeba, right, which has different stages, right? They must have marked it too. There will be different multiple slides with different stages of their life cycle. and you must have also written the scope, right? If you have not, you may, right? You might in 11th and 12th, if you move into biology, decide to pick it up. Now, the nucleus first divides amitotically into, okay, there is mitotic division, there is amitotic division, there are different things. So the nucleus will divide into two, then there will be division of cytoplasm, and the amoeba will finally split into two daughter cells. In the first slide, I think I told you, when there is a stress, a specific stress, you may see here the nucleus is under stress, right? So the nucleus divides first here, and upon division of nucleus, there will be another state here. Two nucleuses will be there. There will be, let's keep it like this, forget this one. And then it will divide into two daughter cells, right? So Leishmania, you have one example, a very distinguished one. Now, we have had what? Binary fission we have had. Now, there is another one, and we call it multiple fission. What do you think multiple fission would be? What does the name suggests, right? So multiple fission, it does not require any favorable condition, right? So under unfavorable circumstances, right, certain unicellular organisms, right, they develop a hard protective covering over the cell, right? So there is unfavorable circumstances, the unicellular organism, and what they do, they develop what? Hard protective, right, covering. And where they develop it? They develop it over the cell, okay? And we call them what? We call them cyst. These are called cysts. So they develop a cyst, right? And the nucleus of the cell divides repeatedly. Okay, the nucleus of the cell divides repeatedly, and they produce many nuclei, right? So definitely there is a nucleus, repeated division, right? Nucleus will have repeated division, and these repeated division nuclei will be surrounded by a small amount of cytoplasm. Surrounded by cytoplasm, small amount of cytoplasm, not to mention, right? And many daughter cells are produced within the cyst, because the cyst is a harder covering. It won't let out the nucleus and cytoplasm, on its own. So let's imagine, right? There is a cell, okay, and it met some unfavorable circumstances. Now, under unfavorable circumstances, this cell would develop outer covering, right? And we call them what? Cyst, right? Now, once this is done, this cell will produce many nuclei inside the cyst, right? Inside the cyst won't go anywhere, right? And all the nuclei will be surrounded by small amount of cytoplasm, okay? Now, this was under the unfavorable circumstances. Now, what happens is when favorable condition returns, when the favorable condition returns, what happens is the offsprings are released, okay? So now this will break down and the offsprings will released. As a result, there will be multiple cells. So from one cell, we have multiple cell, and hence the name multiple fission, right? And multiple fission is seen in case of many algae. Algae have multiple fission, and then plasmodium have multiple fission. Plasmodium, which disease they cause? Malaria. These are bonus points, you should try to remember them. So multiple fission is seen in many algae and the malarial parasite, that is plasmodium. And as the name suggests, you have your multiple fission here, right? Now, let's move on. I hope this much is clear, right? We shall hop on to the next one. And the next one that we have is called budding. What could you collect from the name? What does a bud means? You must have seen a little flower, rose plant. Let's talk about rose plant. So if this is one of the branch, right, you must have seen something like this, the one that develops later into a flower, right? So there are certain small structures, right, on the body wall. Bulb like projection, it looks a lot like a bulb. So bulb like projection, and we call them buds, right? So these buds may be unicellular, these buds may be multicellular, right, depending on the type of the parent. So if the parent is unicellular, the bud will be unicellular. If the parent is multicellular, the bud will be multicellular, right? And the bud finally separates to form new individual, right? So these buds are on the parent body, right? And then the buds shed. By shed I mean they fall down, and then they grow into new individual. How do we know that, right? Now let's take example of a yeast or a hydra, right? Let's talk about hydra here. So hydra looks like this. There's tentacles here, right? And there is a small outgrowth. Okay, it will grow up. See the cycle, right? So this is the same hydra, but now this part is a bit grown out, and it has tentacles of its own now, right? It further grows up, and then comes a time when it separates from its parent. It separates, it fall downs, and then you now have two of them, right? This is the classic example of hydra. Very simple, easy to understand, and very classic example of budding, right? Similarly, there is an yeast, right? Yeast is a unicellular organism, right? There will be bud on its bodies, right? It will grow and grow and grow. There will be a stage where there will be n number of buds on its body, n number of them, and when they separate, they become multiple yeast, right? So you have two examples. You have an example of yeast and you have an example of hydra. So I hope the budding is clear. Let's move on to the next one. The next one is fragmentation. A rather easy one, nothing much to worry about. These are very simple things. The thing that you are studying in grade 10th is, how should I put it, it's not even 5% of the things that there are to know, right? But for now it's more than enough. Now you must have heard of spirogyra, right? Green filamentous structures, right? They float in it. So when a spirogyra, let's first write the name here. Spirogyra. I find these words to be a bit of a tongue twister. There are a lot of terms in biology which, even though you know them, right, you know everything about them, but whenever you try to pronounce them, especially in a major event, right, like for example, you are up on a stage and trying to give a presentation, and when you try to pronounce spirogyra, you might say spirogyra. It's possible, it happens, right? So you pay attention to that. Even if you don't, it's fine. So now spirogyra has filaments, right? So when a spirogyra filament, it breaks into pieces. Each piece grows into a new filament by cell division, okay? And this process is called fragmentation. Now it may sound similar to budding, right? But it's not, because if it was, then why would we need to differentiate them into budding and fragmentation? Why not to study them under one umbrella, right? So during this process, the body of an individual, it breaks up into two or more parts, and each part develops into a complete organism, right? So let's say that we have a spirogyra here, right? and spirogyra are present in filaments. These are two filaments. Okay, and here it is its genetic material. Okay, so you now have filament of a spirogyra, right? Nucleus would be somewhere here, right? Spiral chloroplast and genetic material. Now this curly thing, no, it's not DNA. Okay, we are not talking about DNA, because if nucleus is here, how come DNA is outside, right? So it's not DNA. I told you, because there will be genetic material in it. Why? Because there is nucleus and then you have a spiral chloroplast. So whatever these things you are seeing, no, these things, they are chloroplast, spiral chloroplast. So don't get confused by the structure of it. So what happens is, let's say that, and we are not talking here about equal division. Okay, we are not talking about equal division. You may say that, okay, let's break it from here, from the middle, and then you will have 1 and 2, and it will grow into another 2, right? So what's the point then? Because this one will come like this, right? It will stay 1, and this one will stay 1, right? That is not the point. So what happens here is that a small chunk from it, it's possible that it may fall out, right? So even if a small chunks fall out, it will grow into a full organism here, right? So now we have 2 from 1, right? And even if there is equal division, or the fragment falls off from the equal part, this will again, a small portion from it may fall down, and it will grow into a full organism, right? So as the definition suggests, spirogyra filament, right? These are called filaments. These filaments break into pieces, and these pieces grow into individuals, right? I hope that's clear from the potato diagram that I have made here. I hope so. Now each part develops into a complete organism. I said, even if there's a small portion coming out from here, anywhere, the tiniest portion will grow into a complete organism, right? Now we have certain animals like sponges, hydra, planaria or flatworms. They also reproduce by a similar method. Let's call it what? Regeneration. Right? Regeneration means a small, I should not say organ, okay? A small filament or a piece, it grows into full organism, right? It's called a regeneration, a complete organism. Not in the case of the lizard tail, right? Because let's say that if a lizard tail breaks down from here, right, this portion, it does not grow into a complete lizard, no, but there is a formation of new tail here. So this is not in the case of you should not regard them as fragmentation or regeneration. No, there is a stem cell in action over here at the end of a tail, but that's not the same thing, right? So in complex organism, all cells are not similar, right? So the cells are organized into tissue and tissue into organs. So the different organs are placed at different positions, right? So if such an organism breaks off at any point, the broken part cannot grow into a complete organism with all the organs. That's what I want to tell you, right? The broken portions cannot grow into a complete organism with all the organs. So that is the major difference between complex things and simple things, right? So I hope fragmentation and this regeneration part is clear, right? If not, you can ask all the queries that you have down in the box, right? Now let's move on to another one, and the another one we have is spore formation, right? Now things might sound and might look very same, but they are very different from each other, right? So another one we have is spore formation. Now how spore formation is different, what it does, let's dive into it. Now spores are asexual reproductive bodies, right? We are talking about asexual reproduction, but they are enclosed in a thick walled structure, a sporangium. Now we talked about unfavorable condition in multiple fission. how there were multiple nucleuses dividing inside the cyst, and when the favorable condition returned, it broke down into it broke down, and the multiple nucleus, they came out with, the individual cells, they came out. Now the spore formation is something similar, right? So we have, spore formation is something similar. We have multiple bodies, right? Asexual reproductive bodies. These are called reproductive bodies, and these are covered in sporangium. This is your sporangium. These are asexual bodies, and this sporangium is in case of unfavorable condition, right? Unfavorable condition would be, there would be extreme heat, dryness, acidity, and so on, right? So when there's unfavorable condition, the asexual bodies are enclosed in sporangium. Sporangium is what? It's thick, it's hard, right? It is thick walled, basically, thick walled, and it's very hard, right? Now spore formation is very common method, in many lower forms such as algae, bacteria, fungi. Examples may have algae, bacteria, fungi. Now you might say that, oh, we have studied about algae and bacteria in different type of asexual reproduction form, right? But there are different species, different forms of bacteria, different forms of algae, different forms of fungi. So it is not necessary that all the different species would produce by the similar method, right? It's not possible. So they have adapted to the different condition, and because of their adaptation, they reproduce in a different way, right? Now when the favorable condition, again here it returns, when the favorable condition returns, what happens is that this sporangium, right, it burst. Sporangium burst, and the bodies, the asexual bodies, not the dead bodies, the asexual bodies are what? They are now released. Okay, and now these spores, the same spores, the asexual bodies, these same spores, what happens is that they generate into new individuals. Okay, so by this method of asexual reproduction, organisms can overcome unfavorable condition, right? Now some example, let's look at, algae, bacteria, fungi are there, but some fungus species such as Rhizopus, and then you have mucor is one example, mucor, mucor. These things, they reproduce through spore formation, right? I think it's clear. If not, again, you can ask us questions. Now let's hop on to another one, and that is vegetative propagation in plants. We are going to take an example of very, very common vegetable, right? And I think it's a favorite one. Vegetative propagation. Potato, right? This is one universal vegetable which could go mix up, right, with every other one, right? Be it brinjal, be it your ladyfingers, and then be it I don't know what it is called exactly, but I think the purple thing, right, the gold, and there are other things. So you have soya chunks, then we have, some people mix it with paneer too, right? So potato is something that is universal. It goes along with every single vegetable, right? Now the vegetative parts, we must talk about vegetative parts. There are certain vegetative parts. By vegetative, we mean that something that could grow, that could produce new plants. And what are they? Root, right? Stem, right? Leaf, etc. These are the things that could grow into a new plant. They produce new plants, right? And hence they are called vegetative parts. Now the stem of rose, let's say that it's a rose plant, right? And gardeners, they cut it from here, right, and they tie it up in some other thing, and it grows into a new rose plant under suitable condition, right? Now potato, okay, we have a potato here. Now you must have seen the eyes of the potato, the small things, and sometimes you must have seen an outgrowth on them too, right? The tiny outgrowth. Okay, now these eyes are called buds or eyes. Okay, and when you cut this thing eye to eye, okay, now you're 1 2 3 4 5, and when you sow them in soil, after completing the phase it will be grow into 5 new potatoes, not 5 new potatoes, sorry, 5 new potato plant, right? And these potato plants will have potatoes under soil, n number of potatoes, right? So stem, leaves and roots growing, right, into a new plant, right, it is called vegetative propagation. Why? Because they are growing up from the vegetative parts. We have multiple examples, we have rose potato, we have seen, then we have what, dahlia we have, right? And then we have sweet potato also. The adventitious roots, if you know about, the adventitious roots become swollen, right, due to storage of food, okay? And then there are buds present on them, and then when roots bearing such buds are planted in the soil, new plants produce as the result of vegetative propagation, right? And there's one more thing, you must have seen banana, okay, then you have jasmine too. All these plants, they are a result of vegetative propagation. Now there's one more thing, right? They are genetically similar, right, to their parent. Must know that this is one important point. Genetically similar to their what? To parent. And the seedless plants, the seedless ones, they can be grown by vegetative method. Okay. Now some plants produce subaerial stems which develop as lateral branches from the mother plant and give rise to new plant after getting detached from the mother plant, right? Now you have grasses, as the stem grows along the surface of the soil and produces roots, right, where it touches the ground to give rise to new plant. You have seen grass, no? Let me draw it for you. What I mean to say is that, let's say here is a grass, right, and it runs through the ground, and there is a place where it gets attached to the soil, and once it's get attached to the soil, there is another bunch of grass from here, all together a new plant, a different plant, right? So the subaerial stems, they develop as lateral branches from the mother plant. This is the mother plant, right? Mother plant, and these are the subaerial branches, and they developed, right, and once they touch the ground, they gave rise to a new plant, right, getting detached from the mother plant, okay? Runners in grasses, okay, these are certain examples. And in some plants, the underground stem gets modified for the storage of food, okay? Under unfavorable condition, it produces shoots and gives rise to new plant. There are a number of examples, you can look for them, right? And such a stem, they include rhizomes, tubers, bulbs, corms, all those things. Potato also, is used to store the food for the plant, right? So it is one example. Now vegetative propagation is, I think, clear. Now we move on to okay, before we move on to them, I must tell you about this one. There is one plant, bryophyllum, okay, bryophyllum. In Hindi we call it Pathar Chatta. I don't know if you have heard it or not, but bryophyllum, it's a beautiful leaf, right? And the vegetative part for this bryophyllum would be its leaf, right? So from the edges of the leaf, you will see multiple outgrowths, and this leaf holds the capacity to develop into a plant, into a small plant or plantlets under favorable condition, right? And these plantlets can be grown into an independent plant, right? So bryophyllum is one classic example. Now let's move on to the artificial modes of vegetative propagation with the help of human interference. Artificial vegetative propagation. Now these things will be similar. Vegetative propagation will be similar, but the thing is there will be human interference, and hence the name artificial. Now we have farmers, right? We have gardeners, right? Even in our farms there are a number of things. Horticulturists, what they do is that there are certain methods, let's talk about the methods here. And the methods are grafting, layering, right? You have grafting, you have layering, and then you have cutting, and tissue culture is there, right? Cutting is there, tissue culture is there. So all these methods are used for artificial vegetative propagation, right? It's a very simple method. When a piece of parent plant stem with nodes is cut and the internodes are placed in the moist soil, right? For example, here is a plant and it has few nodes. Now these nodes will be cut, right? And it will be sown. It will grow into plant 1, plant 2 and plant 3. So this is how artificial vegetative propagation it takes place. This grows into a new plant. Now in grafting, what happens? The cutting of a plant is attached to the stem of a rooted plant. This was for what? This was for cutting, right? In grafting, what happens? Let's say this node, it will be taken and it will be attached to a stem with root, right? This is grafting. Okay. Now the attached cutting becomes a part of the rooted plant and draws nutrition from it and grows root at the joint. Okay. Now if it is separated, it grows into a new plant. In layering, what happens? That one or more branches of the parent plant are bent and close to the ground and covered with moist soil. So let's say that there is a parent plant, right? And it has certain branches. Now what happens is that this will be like this. Its part will be bent and closed under soil. Here we have soil, here we have soil, here we have soil, right? These are all soils, moist soil. And now these will grow into individual plants. So this is how layering works. Okay, the covered portion going to grow roots and develop into new plants. Now tissue culture, right? Tissue culture is something that is a dedicated field of study too. It is a dedicated field of study, right? Now what happens in tissue culture is that a tissue from a desired plant is placed in suitable nutrient medium. Okay, here is a tissue. Tissue is what? Cluster of cell, right? And it is grown into a medium, right? This is your medium. And when it goes into that, it develops into tiny plantlets, right? You have to provide nutrition, you have to provide specific environment, certain growth hormones you have to provide. All these things you have to in order for them to grow into a mature plant, right? So it will have nutrition, optimum environment, growth hormones and all other things. Now tissue culture allows us to grow a whole plant from the cell taken from any part of the plant body, and these many plants can be grown from one parent plant into a laboratory under controlled disease-free condition. Keep that in mind. Disease-free condition you have to keep in mind, because if there is disease, the plants will not grow at all, right? So this was all about asexual reproduction at your level, right? Next, we will study about the sexual reproduction. If you have any question, you can ask us, you can drop it down in the box and we'll get back to you. Okay, thank you very much for listening to me. I wish you the best.